able to join us live, so they can go back and listen later. On the screen, you'll notice that there is a call-in number, and I've also given you the option of joining for your audio via microphone in your computer or tablet. Gail Chapman will be hosting our session for us tonight, and she will mention to you several times to ask if you have questions or if you have comments. We certainly hope that you will chime in. Our only request is that if you do connect via audio, that you mute your line if you're not speaking. To do that, on your top toolbar, you should see a microphone and a drop-down menu, and it gives you an option to mute your line. I'll be doing the same on my end. I have a couple of cats who seem to like to chase each other around the house whenever it's time for a webinar. I guess they like the attention and don't realize they're having it. But I'll be here available if there are any questions or concerns that pop up. I'll be happy to help you. You can send a message to me privately or just put it in the chat window and I'll assist with that. But without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Gail. So Gail, have at it.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. So happy to see so many of you here this late in the school year. I know that it's very difficult to find time, any time, when you're teaching, but at the end of the school year, things become exceptionally crazy. And for those of you who are teaching CSP, this is a big week, right, coming up, because next Friday will be the very first offering of the APCS Principals exam. So that's exciting news, and I'm sure that you're all scrambling a little bit trying to figure out what it is that your students are going to need most for the part of the exam that's still to come. So thank you again for joining us, and so let's get started. As Melissa noted, I am famous for loving wait time, and that can be painful on a webinar. So please, if you have questions or comments along the way, don't worry about chiming in, and feel free to interrupt. It's very hard to get attention any other way than doing that. So please feel free to do that. We have 4 panelists tonight that will share their experiences, but again, I'm hoping that this can become a dialogue. There's a range of experience on this panel, and I will let them tell you more about that themselves in a minute when we do introductions. There will be, basically the agenda is exactly as I already outlined it. I have some questions for the panelists to focus their attention on a particular thing, successes from the year, challenges from the year, but mostly to just share experiences that might be useful for those of you who are also teaching ECS, CS principals, even APA or random other courses, which there are many out there. So, and then we'll just wrap up with final Q&A, but you don't have to wait. So with that, I will ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and just kind of say where they teach, what they teach, and a little bit about themselves. And we'll just go in alphabetical order according to the names on the list. So Peggy, go ahead.
Okay, can everybody hear me? I hope so.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. All right, so again, my name is Peggy Birch, and I am a first-year ECS teacher from Camden, Delaware. I have taught 19 years. I am training this summer to prepare for teaching computer science principles in addition to ECS in the fall, so it's pretty exciting. At this point, Gail, do you want me to talk about anything else, or just you want me to talk about?
I think that's
just introduce ourselves.
I think that's a little bit about, I guess, a little bit about just an overview of the how many ECS classes you have.
Okay.
And that, but otherwise.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have 2 full sections of ECS. It's the first year that it has been offered at our high school, and it's been very popular. Actually didn't anticipate having as many students sign up as did, so we ran out of room, so hopefully they'll have more sections open up in the fall. But it's been a very, very active year for our kids in ECS.
Great. Okay, Christy?
Hi, guys. It's my second year teaching ECS. This is my 13th year teaching. So out of my 5 sections of classes that I teach, 4 of them are kind of a biology class and 1 is ECS. Last year it was the same. The only difference being that last year I taught 11th and 12th grade, kind of a mixed class for ECS, and this year is just 11th grade, which is awesome. I'm in New York City. It's a Title I school, so high needs, a really great population to get excited about computer science. So I'm actually really loving the course, and hopefully we'll learn a lot from you guys today.
All right, Tanja?
Oops, I need to unmute. Hi, my name is Tanja Myers, and this is my second year teaching ECS. So I teach ECS 1 class as well as 2 AP Computer Science Principles classes, as well as 2 AP Computer Science A. My AP Computer Science A and my Principles classes are combined. And I also teach 8th grade computer science as well. And this is my 14th year teaching as well. And right now it seems that my students are really enjoying exploring computer science. And one thing I do like, and I can probably share this later on as well, is that the connection between ECS and AP Computer Science Principles.
Okay, yes, and I'm going to want you to talk a lot about that later on. So thank you. And Shelley?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shelley Sanji. I am a first-year ECS teacher at Oak Grove High School in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I'm on a block schedule, and so I've only been teaching it since January, but I'm teaching 3 full blocks of it currently. So this is my first year teaching it, but I've been teaching for 6 years otherwise between math and STEM. And technology has always been kind of a passion of mine, so I've really enjoyed teaching the ECS class.
All right, awesome. So with that, we're going to dive right in. And I'm always in favor of starting with the most positive things. So I'd like to hear about successes for the year and why you considered them successes. So this can range all over the place. And we're going to do all of this now in order of experiences. So we're going to start with our 2 first-year ECS teachers, which would be Peggy and Shelley, and then go on to Christy, and then Tanja, because she's teaching multiple different courses. Okay, so you all can just wait for a breath and fill in as needed. And anyone else who has a question along the way or wants to comment on their own successes in any one of these courses, please feel free.
Okay, well, I guess I'll get started. Again, this is Peggy. This has been my first year teaching, again, ECS. And I think probably the biggest success that I found this year is the total shift in my approach to teaching. Over the past 19 years, like so many, I really was more, it was more of a teacher-led classroom. I would stand up, give instructions, kind of feed them information. So this has been a real shift for me to go more towards a student problem-solving approach. It really has gone well. I feel like the kids, have taken on more responsibility for their own learning and have really built skills, added to their toolbox of ways to approach problems and solve problems. And I think as far as why I would consider these successes is because, I've just observed my students become clearly more independent learners. They've persevered, through some of their problems. They've built confidence, their stamina, for hanging in there and persevering through the problem-solving process has really improved. And in the process also, I think, because they had to work with other students, their communication and collaborative skills have really improved too. And I think with that comes confidence. So I would say for me that's been the biggest success.
This is Shelley speaking again, also one of the first-year ECS teachers. I had two really, what I consider really big successes for my classes this year. I also noticed with my classes, like Peggy said, a lot of the group work and seeing the kids build each other up, but also they themselves grow in confidence and independence and a lot of those same things. And I teach ninth graders, so this is kind of like the pivotal time for them. They come into high school kind of scared and don't really know their place. And then it's really neat to see them by the end of my course or by the end of my semester how much they've grown and become a really kind of a young adult, which is really exciting. But two of the biggest things that I noticed on my end that I thought were big successes was for two particular projects. One was with the website unit. I challenged my students after, like on the very first website, I challenged my students after just like a day or two of instruction. I said, go out and look at some websites, find what you like about them, and then discover the code for yourself. Find out how to do that. Find the HTML tags for that. And what I found was so surprising but so exciting at the same time was that within a day, my kids had surpassed my knowledge level, which I had taken web design courses in the past, but they had surpassed my knowledge level, as well as they had already passed what was in the entire curriculum. They were looking up some really cool, neat things, and they were coding their websites, HTML tags, to do those same things from scratch. And so that was really neat to see for me. That was to me, that was a big success, seeing them just kind of soar with that project. And, for me, that was a little bit of a hard pill to kind of swallow, of just knowing that, or accepting the fact that I wasn't the expert in the room. But it just took me about a day or two to kind of just take that in and be like, okay, I'm not going to hold my kids back because they know more than me. I just need to swallow that and encourage them and keep them moving forward. And so as a result, with their very first websites they created were just mind-blowing to me. Well, then whenever they did their next website, I challenged them to make it look professional, and we studied what's professional and what's not. And I challenged them. I actually had a couple people come into my room and critique them on their websites. And I told them, there's a couple college professors that teach web design. I said, when they come in, I want them to be absolutely astounded that your websites are made by ninth graders and not by professionals who are being paid. So that's your expectation. Go meet it. And gave them the time that they needed for a few days, and I was really, really impressed with how that went. To me, that was a huge success. And the thing is, they turned around and they couldn't believe they had done this. And these are all from kids who hadn't done HTML prior to about 2.5, 3 weeks before that. They'd never seen it. And so the growth in those few weeks was a real big success, and it kind of lit a fire under them, and they were super proud of themselves, and I was super proud of them as well. And then the other thing that I found was a really big success was on one of my projects, in the group project, I started off with getting them into groups, and then I said, okay, y'all have 3 minutes, and only 3 minutes, to ask me any and all questions about this project. And I knew it was going to be a multi-day project. And they're like, what? Why? I was like, because you need to figure these things out by yourself. You know, you're not going to always have your teacher by your side helping you and answering every single question along the way. In life, you're not going to always have a teacher. So figure out what your questions are, come see me. And I said, you only have 3 minutes. Well, what it forced them to do was take ownership, and throughout the project, I ended up giving a couple more chances, but it really forced them to take ownership as a group and work together and solve the problems that came up and make decisions for themselves. That's something that they don't like to do at the 9th grade level. They think that they always have to get permission for everything. And one thing that I found was a really big success with this was they learned to just make decisions and be okay with those and be confident in what they decided. And it really helped them grow tremendously in the confidence, the decision-making, problem-solving skills, all those things. And in the end, they grew tremendously, and they noticed that, and I noticed that. So that was also a really big success for me. And I find that teaching those kind of skills, getting them to realize that, those are life skills that they need well beyond my class, and that's the most important thing I can give them are those life skills. And that made me real proud at the end.
Great, thank you.
I think I go next.
Christine.
So I definitely agree with Peggy and Shelley in terms of, building the skills with communication and collaboration. I think that's huge in this class, and even though it's my 2nd year teaching it, it continues to be a success that I really admire about the course. When you're comparing it to other classes, I teach a biology class in 4 other periods, and it's just completely different. The level of group work that they get to do in this class is just awesome. And specifically, I have a student who he has an IEP, he's a special ed student. I taught him last year for a completely different biology class, and he was a mediocre at best student. He just really, I didn't see any real passion for the subject. He was just kind of doing what he could. He wasn't really interested, and he took whatever the fastest route to finish whatever the work was. And then he's in this class, the ECS class this year, and it's almost like a different person. And it's really, really amazing to me because I see so much potential in him that I never saw before, and he just seems to have passion for this. So I hope that he'll, consider that as a potential career path, but it's really cool to see him persevering and just being really independent and problem solving. And just, turning into a completely different student than I ever had seen him in the past. In terms of curriculum successes, I, this year, implemented a few cross-curricular projects. So because all of my students are 11th graders, they're also taking chemistry and U.S. history this year. So I collaborated with those teachers to kind of provide subject matter for the skills that they were learning in my class. So we did a web design project where they had a president, and each pair of students researched the president. They looked up policies and all kinds of information, and then they built that into the content of the website that they built. So it was a really neat way for me to support another teacher, and also the subject matter that they're, that is really important to them. I want them to feel like they're kind of getting both together and validated for the time that they're spending on the project. And we also did a scratch project on the periodic table. So they chose certain elements, and instead of doing the alphabet project where they have each letter flip around and it turns into, A turns into an apple and says A is for apple. Instead of doing that, they had the symbol for the element, and the text was information about, how many electrons it had or its atomic number. And then when it turned, it was a picture that represented that element. So those were really successful for me this year in terms of the curriculum, and I'm definitely going to keep all of those things for next year.
So I want to ask you a follow-up question, Christy,
Okay.
before Tanja speaks. What would you say for you as a teacher was the biggest difference between teaching ECS this year and teaching ECS your first year?
I mean, there's so many things. I felt confident enough about where I was going to kind of figure out last year I felt like I didn't always know, the whole unit, every little lesson, every little detail. I was kind of learning a few steps ahead, a few days ahead of the students. And that was really difficult to think about, okay, am I planning this unit, am I planning this year academically in the right way for the students, or am I just planning it to get through it and, do the best that I can this year, but not necessarily catering to the students' needs. Now that I know the curriculum so well, I can say, okay, I see that, 10 of my students are struggling with this concept, and now I know that this is probably a good way that I can address that. So it lets me kind of slow down and figure things out and cater it more to the students. I don't know if that makes sense, but last year, for example, in web design, I was completely lost, didn't know where to start, didn't know how to do it, was trying to learn it, a few days ahead, and I just didn't know how to deliver those lessons. So I kind of used a crutch of, Khan Academy, Code Academy, and it was the worst decision I made. My students ended up hating it. It completely backfired. I thought it would be a great idea because they could work at their own pace. It was terrible. And what ended up happening is it almost turned some kids off for that unit. So this year I just went slower, and I mean, we do the class 5 days a week, and I'm just finishing Unit 4 in Scratch, and we end school at the end of June, so we have 2 more months, but it's, we go slow, and we have the advantage of doing that because I think it's more valuable to go slow, get what we need out of each unit, and, wherever we end is where we end.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And I put you on the spot there because I know there are, we know we at least have 2 first-year ECS teachers on the call because they're on the panel. And I know that there are likely others out there, or that others. So I think that's really important to kind of surface that, that first year is tough, but it does get better. So, okay, so we can move on now.
This is Tanja, and I agree with Peggy, Christy, and Shelley. With this being my second year, I definitely feel more confident in teaching the course. Last year, exactly what Shelley, my experience is similar to what Shelley's experience. Was just, I was unsure about it, as well as I was used to lecturing. So even just trusting the process of, asking questions, the wait time, giving students the opportunity to think it through, I was just really, last year, focusing on lecturing and feeling like I should have to lecture, but because that was really uncomfortable. And now I feel like I'm more in the pocket regarding how, teaching ECS, and which, with teaching ECS, I'm able to refer to AP Computer Science principles, such as algorithm, linear search, and binary search. We also address it in AP Computer Science principles. Not binary, yes, binary numbers as well, and big data. So it's really important to, reference those things as well. That is just, I think sometimes students who feel like they're very knowledgeable, have a lot of knowledge about computer science, tend to think like, I already know this, what are we doing? And then they discover some of the activities and the things that we do, like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. I didn't realize this, or they may only know the programming aspect of it and not really the various concepts that are implemented in ECS. Another big success that I had this year is that the activity with binary numbers, my students had an opportunity to teach it. They wanted students to teach a lesson, and they were able to teach it to administrators and counselors, a conference here in Delaware. And it was nice to see them teach that lesson and teach it to other teachers and administrators and counselors and explain it to them. And I think that was one of my proudest moments, to actually see their passion and see that they were able to teach the lesson to adults. And the other one is web design was a big hit this year. It seems that the students just really, embraced web design this year, as well as another thing I decided to do this year was, treat my classroom similar to a company. And when they were doing web design, they worked in course, a group of 4s, but then I said, you need a project manager, and we talked about this. We talked about deadlines, and they were able to do their storyboard together, go over it, revise their storyboard. We continually kept the problem-solving method, understanding the problem, make a plan to solve the problem, carry out the plan, review and reflect. Consistently talked about that in class. And so it was really nice to see when they were working on their projects later on, how they would say, okay, what is the problem? We need to go back to the problem, especially when they start saying, I don't understand, or I don't know what to do. And then someone would say, hey, we need to sit down really, okay, so what's the problem? So those are a couple of things that I felt were big successes this year.
All right, thank you. So those of you who are in the chat window as participants would love to hear any comments, questions. You have other successes that you've had this year before we move on. And while I'm happy to answer typed questions, I'd love to hear voices. Okay, so Jeremy says his first year teaching and he's just had a lot of fun. That's a good thing. I like that.
And don't forget, if you want to speak, just be sure to unmute your line so we can hear you.
So according to the chat window, Elise is typing and someone else is typing. Let's see. Oh, okay. All right, Elise, good to know that you are teaching with Shelley, and that will be a good thing to have a mentor right in there in the school. So I'm assuming I'm going to meet you this summer. All right. Well, we will move on, and I will let others ponder for a while and hopefully come up with more. I've decided I don't like the word challenges. I don't know what the right way to frame things are so that it's not learning experiences, right? Everything in teaching is a learning experience. It's not a problem. It's not, but anyway, we know that this is maybe not necessarily the success side of the house. So things that caused you to pause and rethink, for example. So we'll go in the same order. And
okay, well, yeah, I agree that it's all a learning experience every single day. But I would say that for us, for me, as far as maybe struggles were concerned, you know, things that have already been mentioned, you know, like getting up to speed on Scratch and getting up to speed on HTML. I mean, lucky for me, I kind of like all that, and I enjoyed working on that. It was a learning curve, though, obviously, for me, because I had never taught any of that before. I think one challenge in terms of how to handle the kids and the class and the groups was how to like really build equity within the groups. I gave a lot of thought to groupings. I did it randomly sometimes. I put thought to it. I did it all kinds of different ways. But it was kind of hard, I thought, sometimes to get everyone actively working toward a solution. You know, it always seemed like there's that one person that kind of prevails as the one that's going to do a lot of the leading, and that's okay, but there would always be one or two that didn't seem to be really as involved as I would like them to be. And so I guess how I tried to overcome that was, and I listening to Tanja, I thought that was a great idea to treat it like a business and say that you're the project manager, and you know, to kind of like, because actually this whole computer science pathway happens to fall in the business department, and that's where my expertise is anyway. So I could definitely see incorporating that in the upcoming year. But I did work with assigning roles when appropriate. I thought that worked sometimes. What I really thought was the biggest help for me in terms of building equity and having everybody being involved towards working to a solution was to the tag team approach. First time I ever heard of the tag team approach was last summer, and it really worked with my students. And you can really say, and for those of you who are new to it or haven't worked with it yet, it's when you set a time and you say, okay, for example, if we're working with a Scratch program, and you're working on one program together, that you take turns doing the actual typing of the coding. And so I found that really worked well, because those who typically lead now become teachers, and those who oftentimes sit on the sidelines become the new creators. So it's really a win-win every way around, the tag team approach. I also saw it's not only in HTML and Scratch units, but also in the robotic unit. That's useful. And right now we're winding down, trying to get through the data analysis unit, Unit 5. And really it's in that aspect too, because we're working with a lot of spreadsheets and types of charting, things like that. So that tag team approach works well. The other challenge that I hear feedback. Do I sound okay, Gail?
I'm getting feedback too, which makes me think that somebody's not muted.
Okay, maybe that's better. Okay, that's better. Okay, so yeah, that's good. So the second challenge I felt was for me, being that I'm trying this kind of new approach for me, is trying to come up with what were the best questions. How can I ask the right questions to motivate kids to think through to the place I want them to go? And so I think that, I wasn't sure how to approach it. There's nobody else I can talk to at my school that has any background in this. It's easy to stand up there for me and give facts and instructions and all that, but to actually ask guiding questions, and then not only to do that, but be able to respond to their responses in the correct way. I felt that was a challenge for me, and it's still a challenge, and it's something that I'm really hoping to learn more about this summer when I take the training again. I think it's going to really help in that regard. One thing that I think helped a lot to overcome that challenge was journaling. That was really important in our class. I think giving students the question in a way that they can write it first and then maybe talk to their partner about it before I lead the class in a discussion really helped to get conversation going better. So it really was, they responded really well to it, but I felt like I fell short sometimes in terms of, just maybe like Tanja was talking about the wait time, or maybe it was, not giving away too much in the question, to let them think before I expected a response. And then, of course, you always have that one student that raises his hand right away and wants to talk, and the other kids are still kind of thinking. So I still need to work on that. But those are my main challenges for the year.
Thank you.
All right, so my main challenges this year, being, again, first-year teacher on it, one was that same thing that you were just talking about everyone being actively involved in a group, no matter, what size it was, whether it was a partner or 4 or 5 people. I even did one project where I had even a few more than that to really kind of challenge them on this aspect. But what I ended up doing was I told them that anytime they're working with someone, and this is how I overcame this, I kind of stumbled upon it and figured it out somehow or another, but I said anytime you're working with someone else, whether it's one person or a group, you still have to be actively involved, but you can't just worry about yourself. You have to worry about everyone else as well. And so the analogy I used was driving a car, because most of my kids have just now gotten their permit and are learning to drive. And so I asked them, whenever you're on the road driving, do you only pay attention to what you are doing? And of course they said no, thankfully. And I said, well, count up how many things that you have to pay attention to besides just what you are doing. And they came up, each class ended up coming up with 10 plus. And so they realized, they're having to pay attention to, are there, animals trying to cross the road? Like we have a problem with deer in this area. And, is there someone on their left side? Is there someone on their right side? Is there someone walking on the side street? All these different things. And so I tell them whenever you're driving, you're having to pay attention to all those things and take that into account while you drive. And so I use that with their group analogy too. And I said, okay, now you can't just, anytime you're working with someone else, you can't just be worrying about yourself, but worrying about everyone. Because what you don't realize is you might be the person with that dominant personality, and even if you don't mean to, you suppress those who are more shy. And that was real eye-opening to them, because some of them don't realize that they're doing that. And so then they said, so then I was like, well, so the way that you get around that is you start paying attention to other people. Life isn't all about you and your world. So I'd say if you're working in a group of 4 or 5, if you haven't heard someone speak in a minute or two, then you need to turn around or look at them or something and get their attention and say, hey, what do you think about this? And then intentionally get them involved. Or I said, sometimes it's not about speaking. I had one kid who was sick for over a week, and she just didn't have any voice. And so they did other things to incorporate her into the project, because she couldn't just talk a whole lot. And so I told them to be mindful of that. And And so that's kind of the analogy I went with, and that just seemed to really hit home. And ever since I used that, I have noticed a major difference in my kids being actively involved. And I also kind of defined actively involved doesn't mean that you're at the computer clicking the mouse or you're the one typing necessarily. It could be, but you can be actively involved in other ways. You can be discussing an idea with someone else in your group. You can be writing the directions. You can be doing this or that. And gave them a bunch of ideas. I said, but actively involved does not mean you sitting off to the side twiddling your thumbs, and or you're off task or doing something else. That's not actively involved. And so, like I said, ever since I kind of had that little discussion, gave them that analogy, major difference in my group work. What I also did is I captured on a picture one of my groups of 8 kids at one time, because like I said, I did one project where I did a really big group for that purpose of intentionally, and the whole challenge of that one was to intentionally involve everyone in your group at all times. And I took a picture of them of what is like a picture-perfect moment of actively involved. And then I showed it to each of my classes, and I was like, pictures are worth 1,000 words. What words do you see on this picture? And the first thing that came to their mind, and the first thing they always said was, everyone's involved. And I was like, there you go. That's what this looks like. And they had already been doing it, but like they don't get to see themselves doing it. And so showing them that picture was kind of just like a light bulb went off. The other big challenge that I had, especially at the beginning, because with this class I had a lot of the rubrics to go along with projects. And so what I noticed here at the beginning of the course was my kids were kind of using those rubrics as like checklists. They would just kind of go through and check each thing off and say, okay, I have this, and I have this, and I have this. Okay, I'm done. And I wasn't satisfied with that. And I always tell my kids, you should never be complacent. You should always be trying to make yourself better and learn more. So I wanted them to challenge themselves and go beyond just the bare requirements of the rubric. And I kept telling them this, but only about 10% of my students were getting it. And so then I started including in my rubrics like an extra 10 or 15 points, depending upon what the project was and everything. But I don't do everything out of 100 points in my class. Each assignment's worth varying points. And I tell them it's a percentage. I mean, you just divide the top by the bottom, and that gives you a grade. But you know, if something was originally supposed to be out of 43 points, then I might make it out of 53 points, and those last 10 points on the rubric would just say something like impress me, or going beyond, or additional stuff, or whatever. I would add something. I would title it something to that effect. And what I noticed worked best was the one that when I would say impress me, and that was the requirement. And then they would ask, well, how do I do that? Well, that's up to you. You have to go above and beyond, figure it out. And that really worked well.
Okay, so thank you, Shelley. I'm gonna stop you there because I'm looking at the time and realizing, oops. So
sure. I think one of the bigger challenges I had with the particular class I was teaching this year, or I am teaching, is just that the majority of the class has really strong friendships with certain students, and breaking them up to do group work is like you're asking them to, you know, cut off their leg or something. And then there were other students. It's a majority of the class is girls, and there's 3 boys in the class. One of the boys is happy to work with anyone, and then the other 2 are very independent. They want to be by themselves. So that's definitely kind of a push and pull situation, and I tried not to push them too far out of their comfort zone, but definitely changed the group pretty regularly, or the partner work if they were working just in pairs, because I think it is important that they understand, you know, no matter where they are, whether it's college or in the work world, They're going to eventually have to work with people that they don't know that well, and maybe they don't even like. But, you know, you have to find a way to make it work regardless. I think another big problem for me is just timing projects, the longer term kind of projects, so units 3 and 4 more specifically, or I guess the end of units 1 and 2 maybe a little bit. But some students would finish really quickly, other students would take forever and want to be perfectionists about everything. And although I think that that's great that they were taking, you know, such a focus on the project, it was difficult for me because, you know, some students were like, give us another day or give us 2 more days, and then other students said, well, I finished this 2 days ago. I tried to add a lot of bonus opportunities. Some of them were all for it and others not so much, so I'm going to have to keep working on that and figure out, maybe I'll add the impress me kind of opportunities that Shelley was just talking about. I think that's a great idea. But yeah, I think those were 2 really major areas for me. I also didn't have robots last year, and our school doesn't have any money, which I'm sure is similar to many other schools. But I just got funding for Edison's for my class from Donors Choose. So that is a challenge we overcame. And actually it got funded in like 3 days. So I only asked for 11 of them, but it was a couple $100, and I'm super excited to start that in a couple weeks.
Super.
Okay. For me, it's similar with the
All
partners.
right, hands up.
I had a couple of situations with that this year, but the one I would like to focus on, students who really they just were concentrating on, they just wanted the answer, or they wanted, for example, the unit on the problem-solving unit. We were working on a particular activity, and when they discovered that it's going to take some time to really think this through, they kind of wanted to give up. And it was like, well, what's the answer? You know, I don't understand, and just kind of just wanted to give in. And so one of my students, I just, you know, continue to encourage my students to think it through. Let's think it through, and then, you know, I had, you know, of course, prompt them with different questions. And one of my students, she just sat down and she really worked through it, and that's what I was looking for. And then students started gravitating toward her and saying, well, what's the answer? You know, how did you? And the process was that I wanted you to think it, you know, really think it through, and really, you know, take the time to use, you know, the problem-solving method, all those things. And we had a discussion. We had to kind of, you know, talk about this in class, because the students are very competitive, and they like to be around someone who they feel is smart or intelligent. And so what happened, we really, you know, I had to kind of stop class and say, hey, you know, the purpose of this is to really get you to think and to problem solve. And even if you have to answer, if the answer was incorrect, I was going to ask you a question, you know, to prompt you to move, you know, what, to explain your answer, and so on and so forth. And it wasn't about, for me, the answer. It was your thinking process, and trying to get them to understand that there are times you're really going to have to think things through, not to give up. Because when we enter into, you know, the coding section, the programming, the other sections, it's really important to review, to reflect, and it's okay to make mistakes. And we had a, you know, a big discussion about that, and allowing that classroom atmosphere of making mistakes, that it's okay. You know, we want, you know, I want you to review. I want you to reflect. I want you to say, oh my goodness, now I see my error. I want to hear those things. And that was my, you know, first, like, with this group, just really realizing, like, oh my goodness, it was just more concern about that the final answer and a grade, which I understand. I totally understand GPA and all that. But also, I like is in life you really need to know how to problem solve and know how to think things through and not give up. And so that was one of I consider my biggest challenge this year. Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for these folks or other comments that they want to share or discuss? Such a quiet group. All right, Elise, fair enough. Elise says she'll have more questions next time since she's going to be teaching next year. Fair enough. All right, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists to be brief with this next part, since we only have about 6 minutes really to finish up. So in particular, one change that you'll make, 2 tips, and if there's any strategy that you think would be effective no matter what other courses we were talking about. And so the quick version of the response.
Okay, well, as far as changes
starting with
for next year, I would say debriefing. I really see a lot of value in that. However, I want to develop that a little more next year. We only have 50-minute classes. Oftentimes the presentations were done and it was time to debrief and we just ran out of time. So next year my plan is to incorporate that in the beginning of the next day's lesson, to debrief about the previous day. I feel like there's value for the observers, and the kids are really honest about their own presentations and what went right and what went wrong. So I really see a lot of value in that, and I want to do better about that next year. Do you want me to give my tips now, too, or? I can do it quick. Okay, sure. So as far, I'm sorry?
If you can do it quickly.
As far as the
sure
tips go, I would say, stick to the curriculum. It really works. Some of the early lessons have ties later, so don't skip them. I would say lay the groundwork early for journal writing. Make it part of their responsibility and provide teacher feedback. A little bit of energy at the beginning really pays off later, and I really believe in it. And you said 2 tips, so that's it. One strategy. Okay, what strategy would be effective? Reflection on a process, I would say, would be effective no matter what you're teaching. Okay, thank you.
All right, so a change
that
I'm going to make for
perfect.
Next year is do
Shelley,
more of, is actually give a value
curious.
to assignments by taking them outside of my 4 classroom walls, bringing in more people to come look at them, that kind of stuff, like the college professors and whatnot, sending it to principals, that kind of thing. It just makes kids work harder. As far as tips, 2 tips. One, set high expectations from the get-go. Because if you do, your kids will always rise to them. And the other is failure is not an option in my classroom. Like from the beginning, I just make that very clear that failure is not an option, and I expect everyone to perform at a high level. and as a result, they do. And when they want to give up, they just know that they can't. So those are the two big tips I would give. And as far as strategy, one of the strategies that I use in all my classes is don't grade presentations at the very beginning of the year, but rather spend time and critique presentations. For the first few that you give, after every single presentation, each kid, have the class critique them. And that way they start to learn what's good and what's not before they're actually graded on it, and allows them also to get their nerves out.
I guess I'm up next.
Okay.
So let's see. Changes for next year. I definitely want to do more showcase things. So kind of, I think what Shelley was just talking about, but opportunities for kids to show off their work, because they create all this really cool stuff, but some of it you can't just print out and slap on a bulletin board. So I think it would be awesome for other students to get to see it, for the teachers in the school to appreciate their work, and also for, you know, parents and families to be able to come in and say, wow, my kid designed that whole website. That's so cool. Tips. So I do something that I learned at a workshop I went to last summer, and the teacher gave little rubber ducks to every kid every time they had a test in the class, as a means to be like, okay, on a test, you can't talk it out with your partner, but you can talk it out with your duck. So if you're having trouble on a question, you can talk to your duck and figure it out and kind of like go through a thought process. So I've done that every single time I do a test, and literally kids are sprinting to my room to get the rubber duck that they want. And it's not that expensive, but I don't know, if I taught 5 sections, maybe I would think differently. But they love it, and it's kind of a way to excite them about the class. And then I also think another tip is to like make every project, especially in units 3 and 4, to be kind of formative so that they get, you know, a grade for it, but they're constantly able to revise it and turn it back in. And that's kind of a strategy too, so I'm going to end with that.
Okay. And poor Tangela, you are going to get a different question because there's been a request for you to elaborate on how ECS prepares students for APCSE.
Okay. So a lot of things that are covered in ECS,
if you will,
students will see again in CSP. CSP goes a little more deeper, but what I like from it, especially my students who took ECS last year and they're taking CPS this year, they're able to reflect and say, oh, I remember we learned this in ECS and we talked about binary numbers. So a lot of many of the topics that are covered in ECS, you will see it in CSP. Does that help?
I think the other thing I'm going to add, and you've said this to me before, so I'm going to anticipate some of what Shelley's thinking here, and that is that a lot of the strategies that we've talked about, and this is a good way to wrap this up, I think, is that, you know, the problem-solving strategies, the failure not being an option, the presenting, the writing, all of those things that ECS does that you have to spend a lot of time on, and that's what everyone has said tonight. You have to spend a lot of time on this stuff in ECS, but you don't have that kind of time in CS Principles. So if you've done that in ECS and your students already come in with that kind of background, they are much better prepared to delve into the deeper content.
I agree.
Than they would
you're right.
If you have to deal with that.
There's a lot of writing and even just making sure they understand the code. And I feel like my students who took ECS last year, they are very prepared and comfortable versus students who decide to take principles, and they didn't take ECS with me. They, with the writing, they were shocked. The amount of writing they had to do in the course.
Yeah, and I will say it's too bad. Well, there's just too much to talk about. But I think the previous webinar, a couple of the previous webinars, we've had this conversation where folks have elaborated on this and said that they have really noticed a difference among the students who, or between the students who have had ECS and those who haven't. In their classes, that the students who come in without the ECS background may have all the programming knowledge in the world already, but they struggle with everything else. And the students that have had ECS may struggle with the more advanced topics early on, but they have the problem-solving skills to struggle through it. So, thank you, everybody. We talked a lot, and we talked way to the end of time here. So, and that's my fault for not, kind of paying more attention. But I hope that it's been helpful for you all to hear of the varying things that have happened in classrooms this year, and to know you're not alone here. That everybody has their good days and bad days, and lots of great ideas. I have a whole bunch of new ideas myself. I love to duck. Just like I need a duck to talk to, I think, I decided. So if everyone, I would greatly appreciate if you shoot me email if you have additional questions, or anybody on the panel. And keep in mind that we have PD coming up this summer, and apparently there's a webinar next week that's a celebration of AP CSP teachers. So congrats to all of you who've made it through the year, and good luck to your students on the exam.
Thank you so much, Gail.
A wrap.
Yes. Thank you, Gail, and thank you to the wonderful teacher panelists. This was great. I loved hearing the ideas. As Gail mentioned, we are having one more webinar next week that's going to be a celebration of AP CSP teachers that are finishing their first official year. I put a link in the chat box there where you can access our event calendar on the CS for All Teachers website, including the posting for this webinar, and it provides the login details. But thank you all.